Welcome to the Relationship Diversity Podcast, where we celebrate, question, and explore all aspects of relationship structure diversity, from soloamory to monogamy to polyamory and everything in between, because every relationship is as unique as you are. We'll bust through societal programming to break open and dissect everything we thought we knew about relationships, to ask the challenging but transformational questions: who am I, and what do I really want in my relationships? I'm your guide, Carrie Jaroslaw, best-selling author, speaker, intuitive, and coach. Join me as we reimagine all that our most intimate relationships can become. Today's episode is part of our conversation series. I'm just one voice in this relationship diversity movement, and it's important to bring more unique perspectives into the conversation. Today, I'll be talking with Rino Murata, a relationship coach, all about triggers, what they are, how to get in touch with your own triggers, and how to move from being triggered by something to becoming trigger-free by the same thing. But first, a little about her. Based in Vancouver, Canada, Reno is a relationship coach who helps clients get their romantic relationships right by getting a clear understanding of themselves first through a holistic body, mind, soul approach and emotional intelligence. Reno believes love and relationships are worth pursuing. She discovered through parenting her 3 sons that love itself cannot build a strong and healthy relationship, but being able to have mutual trust, honesty, and respect is what makes relationships meaningful to everyone involved. Reno is a certified integral life coach and certified trauma-informed coach. She holds a bachelor's degree in sociology from Sophia University in Tokyo. When she's not working or furthering her training to be a better coach, Reno enjoys cooking for her blended family with 5 kids, or zoning out in front of the TV and not remembering the show she watched for the 3rd time. Let's get into the conversation. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Relationship Diversity Podcast. I've got a great guest for you today. I've got relationship coach Rino Murata, and we are talking about a big subject. Or maybe when we make it bigger, I don't know. But we're talking about triggers.
Yeah.
And I really love this topic because I think that a lot of times we go through our lives and something happens and we react and respond and don't do anything with it. And that is a moment in time that has a lot of information about our past, information about how we view ourselves, information about how we are allowing ourselves to be treated, the boundaries that we hold. There's so much information in that moment. So when we become aware of our triggers, we are empowered to then do more than just react, but learn and grow and create healthier boundaries and healthier circumstances and experiences for our lives. So with that, I want to say welcome, Reno. I am so happy you're here.
Thank you very much, Carrie, for having me on your show.
Yeah. So I always like to start out with you telling us a little bit about yourself and how you came to working and specializing in triggers and helping people to go from being triggered to trigger free, because there's always a story of why we do our work. So would you mind sharing a little bit about yourself?
Yes, thank you. I would look back at my life and say that I've been triggered a lot, pretty much in my entire childhood.
Mhm.
A lot of my, or all of my relationships that I had with my boyfriends from teen until I got married and I am divorced. And those triggers just kept repeating. I would say it wasn't the same incident, but it was the same feeling.
Mm.
So that raised questions eventually when I was 40, a few years ago, and how it led to me wanting to work with my triggers was actually beginning to question what it means to be not triggered. What is it? Is that even possible? What does it feel like to not have these feelings? And is it possible to get rid of these? Um, so the journey was that about 10 years ago, and during my parenting, I have three boys, and two of them are neurodivergent. So I was being triggered that they were not learning fast enough. So
Mm.
it was more of a societal trigger than a personal trigger back then. But that was the door, the gate
Mm.
that opened the journey.
Wow. That is, yeah, that's our kids. I find I have two boys, and they definitely reflect lots of things back to us as parents, and many times feel like I'm learning more than, being a guide for them. Or maybe it's, um, we're both being guides for each other. So I'd like to start with defining, or how you define what a trigger is.
Mm. Um, I would say that's twofold for me. I'm a
Mhm.
trauma informed coach. So there's a definition of trigger that is, our bodies are reacting. It is a fight, flight, freeze, fawn response, and we react faster than our logic and our brain kicks in. So it is a survival mechanism at that point. But is it happening now? Those are questions that only come after you can regulate yourself.
Right.
So that's one portion of what a trigger is. And the other more human aspect is it throws you off like a door handle. you know,
Yes.
you don't know why you're acting that way. Somewhere in your head, back of your head, that this doesn't seem reasonable even to me.
Mhm.
I think those are triggers.
Yeah. And I've found that when I've become more aware, that I get triggered. Like, okay, that is just an awareness within itself. I get triggered. I think everyone does. And then looking at how does that show up in my body, because it always shows up in my
Yes.
body. So, for me, it starts kind of in my belly, and I start to feel, like you said, dysregulated, but also just emotional. I start to feel emotional. I start to feel hot and warm in my body. So I look at the sensory aspects of these responses. And just yesterday, I was in a conversation, right? And I got triggered. And the thing is the person I was talking to was actually wonderful, beautiful, just said one thing that I felt my whole body get. I felt sensation in my body that was not a normal, or not normal. I don't want to say normal, but calmness. And it took me all night to kind of figure out what was that bringing up in me. And I found that it actually was connected to something that happened 30 years ago in a job that I was in. It was an experience, a certain thing that happened that was that was unresolved within me. And so, that was where my work started, my questionings. So I want to ask you, like, where do triggers come from? You have much more experience in that than I do. That was where it came from. I found, 30 years ago, that happened at my job. But where do triggers come from, or where do you find in your work?
So triggers, they do come from trauma, and trauma is a big word, but
Mhm.
it's an impact that had on you, on your nervous system. So it doesn't matter how small or how big. If it meant something to you, then it shook you somewhere in
Mhm.
your core that you didn't like. And, we can talk about boundaries too, because your boundaries were violated, whether you knew it or not. So I'm sorry, I think I lost your question.
Yeah, just where do triggers come from?
Right, right. So yeah, it is the past. It is an event, and it might not be what you thought it was. I think that's what I found a lot with the clients I work with. They think they know what it is. So
Mhm.
that's where they work on for years, maybe. It's not that they're not working on their triggers, but they are therapists or, healing and whatnot, but it's actually something else.
Mm,
And I find that a lot of times it's a sense of worth.
mm,
When you start approaching your sense of worth, then the triggers start to heal.
mm. Yeah. So, how does one go about working on their sense of worth?
This would have to be by working with and talking through it and through a lot of questions. But it could be as small as I don't deserve to buy new socks. It could be something as small as that. And we find it very interesting, surprising how small those things are.
Mhm. Yeah. So, taking small steps and moving in the place of slowly showing yourself that you are worthy
Yes.
of well, okay, so this is I liked your definition of trauma because I think trauma is spoken about a lot these days. I was traumatized by this, I was traumatized by that. But can you define that one more time the way that you talked about trauma?
Yes, it is an impact that had on your nervous system.
Impact on your nervous system. I really like that. That brings, I guess, some more tangible understanding to me about trauma. And when someone has that trauma, they get dysregulated and they don't deal with it. What does that was kind of what you were talking about in your story when you got to I know it was you were triggered societally by your sons and by your sons not maybe following social expectations of how they should learn. What did that trigger within you?
It triggered my entire sense of belonging, my
Mm,
worth in my place in society. All
mm,
those things that I carried in my childhood that I needed to prove to my mother that I'm worthy to be loved. So I
mm,
did everything. I would check off all the boxes for approval. And achievement was a big thing for me. If you give me a task, I will achieve it.
mm.
And then children were a different story. They had their own agenda.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what was your process of moving because that brought up all of your feeling, lack of worthiness of being a good mom, probably of something you were doing, and you're trying to check off all those boxes, just like you said, but still they have their own way of being in the world. What was your process to heal those triggers?
The process was that we ended up homeschooling after going to about a dozen different schools. And we homeschooled for 5 years, and three of those were unschooling, the end of, the last 3 years. So unschooling allowed me to question everything. Why do we do what we do? Why do we go to school? What is success? What is a mother's role? What is happiness? It was really about digging really fundamentally, like to the core of what things mean. And when you start questioning everything, then, we have something to compare. Is it important or is it not? And then you have to compare it with, is it important to me? So that was the process of understanding and just demystifying. Things really aren't what they seem to be.
Right, right. But we take on so much, right, from our childhood as just truth,
Mhm.
which creates that wounding. So I can see how really digging down to the core of who you are and re-identifying yourself,
Recreating, really.
recreating.
from what's important to me. So core values were a thing. I didn't know I was working with core values. But when I look back now as a coach, there was something that had, there was a thread that just carried me through that journey. And that's what was really important to me. So connection and relationship, understanding, love, those are really important values to me. So I wanted to build a relationship with my children based on those values and had to trust that trust is also one of my core values.
Mhm.
That with that, having a good relationship in your childhood years, I believe that that will carry us through life,
Mm,
that they don't have to go through the same kind of healing journey that we do.
right.
I wished my mom, my dad would have trusted in me more, believed in me
Mm,
more, and didn't make me work for my sense of worth. And we all have like really, really dark days, right, in our life. There's storms in our life, and sometimes people can make it and sometimes people can't. I had to think, I'm not going to be in my kids' life forever. What will carry them through life no matter what? And the answer to me was that they are able to trust in themselves. They are able to believe in themselves.
yeah, that's really powerful as a parent to be able to cultivate that as much as possible within the relationship with children and then also within the relationship of any intimate partners.
Yeah.
Trust is essential. And when trust is lost for one reason or another, the triggers seem to come up a lot more, would you say?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Trust is so many things. It's about also being able to believe in something that you can't really have logic or reason to. Trust can be short term, it could be long term. There's so many layers to trust.
Yeah. Yeah. It's deep. And trusting yourself is also really, I find, trusting who I am and my path and my truth and my worth is something that I'm working on as well.
Hmm.
Now, I have a question in terms of, I think like triggers fall in a couple different categories, right? We can be triggered by something like, let's say, what happened to me yesterday. This was nothing that someone was doing to me, nothing that someone said to me that was actually anything mean or unaffirming. Like it was just said in just the midst of a conversation, but it triggered something from my past. Okay, so there's that camp, but there's also the camp of being triggered um, by someone who is overstepping either boundaries that were placed or is bringing to light the need for boundaries that have not been specified for one reason or another. In which case, like the first circumstance or situation that I was talking about, that I feel like is about me going in and doing my internal work. The other is also, but it's also going to be me expressing my needs, my boundaries. Well, first coming, understanding what those are within me, and then being able to express that and implement them in my life, in my relationships. Can you speak to those two different kinds of triggers?
Yeah, we could talk for a few weeks.
Oh, good.
Either way, the triggers, like the first one that you mentioned, the conversation you were having yesterday that evoked an emotion, I think all of them are unresolved. And it just reminded you of something. I can relate to that. A couple months ago for my birthday, I wanted to have 45 candles on my two chocolate cakes. And someone said, I'll never do that. It's just a waste of candles. I bawled my eyes
Right.
out. It's like, why? Right. But like you, I had to sit with why did I even go to that reaction? And it was that I didn't have any memories of having a happy birthday in my
Mm,
childhood. And at age 45, I found something that makes me happy in that moment. So I felt that, I didn't deserve that. So inconsequential. But it led to that, that memory. But realizing that allows us to also come back into the moment and realize that it's not happening now. It is not happening anymore. We
Mhm.
get to choose what we want to do in our life, what we want. So those are definitely moments that something is healed. As for boundaries, it takes two. We know we can only do so much. We need to know what it is. We need to learn what our boundaries are. And it is also our responsibility to lay that very firmly and to let people know. There are ways to let people know in a kind, non-offensive, challenging manner. But also, it's our responsibility that if someone keeps overstepping them, or even once, no is a no.
Right.
If they overstep the boundaries that you have asked to be respected, we get to walk away and we don't need to explain to anyone. We told them if it's someone that is close to us, like, in our intimate relationships, we talk about it. But if they don't choose to respect that boundaries, then it's still up to us. What are we going to do with that information?
Right. And having that, sometimes I call it, a choice point. I can choose in
Mhm.
this moment, how am I going to respond in both situations, in both scenarios? Do you feel that it's really possible to be trigger free?
Triggers will always stay with you and you'll always have triggers. But what I think about trigger free is that we get to choose what to do with it.
Hmm.
And, there are levels and variations of triggers. There are like very extreme triggers that you lose your calmness. You can't be in that moment anymore. And there are triggers that you can laugh about, such as I have a certain way I like to fold my laundry. And if anyone else did the, other ways, I might redo it. But, those are things that there's our little quirks, right? And, in our family, we can laugh about it and we show understanding. It's not a big deal. As long as it doesn't become like a controlling thing. I think those triggers, we can learn to live with it. And by trigger free, I really mean about those extreme ones that so dysregulate you that it would bring you down for days and actually having to live that trigger for years. That definitely can become a lot more minimized. And I don't have the same triggers. I don't feel those kind of extreme triggers anymore that I used to feel for 40 years. I'm 45 and I just don't have it anymore. So if it's possible for me, I do believe it's possible for others.
Yes, I have had the experience where triggers that I never thought I would get over, or not get over, but just move through and heal, have healed. It is possible, and it takes patience and guidance, because in the times where the triggers were so deep, I had to work with someone because I will hide from them if I don't, if I can. And having a good, compassionate coach or healer, or however you want to look, therapist, counselor, to ask questions in a compassionate way to help you think through things and feel through things and move through things is really helpful at times. How, if someone was listening to this and they feel like they've felt those feelings right in their body, so they've identified, oh, that might be me getting triggered. So now I've got this awareness that, oh, okay, I never thought about it before, but now I'm realizing when I feel that feeling in my stomach, I'm feeling triggered. What is the first step that you would give them? They're not working with anyone, they don't have anyone, but they want to start the process of moving from trigger to trigger free. Step number one, what would you tell them to do?
Step number one is the awareness, really.
Mm,
If you don't have awareness, then you don't know what to do. If you don't feel like you have a choice. But when you do have that awareness, or I earlier said that the incidents were different, but the feelings were the same.
mm,
And those I think are really, really big hints. Have I felt this before? And if you have, then that is definitely a trigger. And if you can realize that even for a second, because it takes practice actually to be able to be aware and do something. They're two separate things. We need to create something called the window of tolerance. And that window of tolerance is the tolerance level you raise as you regulate yourself more. So that is in increments, you know. The first thing might be, I have to step outside, or I have to stop talking. I have to, whatever it is that is going to help you in that moment is the first step without judgment.
Yes, I love that. And that leads me to the other question that I had was I think people are all different. We're all unique and we all deal with our triggers in different ways. That initial step that you were just talking about. I tend to withdraw and go do the things that I do, take a shower, lay on, my yoga mat or or just listen to some calming music or walk or something like just but by myself. That's what I tend to do. And that comes from my childhood because when my nervous system was most dysregulated during my parents' divorce, I would put myself in my room and put on music and just listen to music. So a lot of times music will help me to just accept where I'm at, which I agree with you. Acceptance is imperative. We never want to gloss over what's going on within us. We want to accept what's going on, accept the feelings, the thoughts, and the sensations. So, what are other ways? Because I'm like me, that's how I do it. But what are other ways that you found people when they get triggered, how they can kind of start to regulate their nervous system or just become aware or just like accept their feelings? What are other ways besides just pulling themselves away from everyone?
You may have heard that, emotions, there's no good or bad in emotion. They are merely messengers. They are only there to tell us something. So, with that non-judgmental approach to yourself, for yourself, to be able to look at, no matter how uncomfortable it is, there's some sort of message that your body, your heart, your soul is trying to tell you. So, with tenderly, hold that emotion in your heart and sit with it and just be curious about why, why am I feeling that way? If someone that is physically injured, you're not going to start questioning them, well, no one else has that kind of injury,
Mm.
you know? And I think goes to not compare ourselves, that there are people who go through much more difficult things, but it's yours. And that's really important to you. You feel something in your body and it's really, really trying to tell you something. So it's that compassion for yourself, show compassion to yourself. Try to have empathy for yourself. And it doesn't have to be sympathy, because you might go into a cycle of validating you can stay there. So I think there's a difference.
So I guess my question is, have you found that when someone is unconscious of their trigger, but something happens, they feel it, and then the next moment that that tends to whatever that reaction is, whether it's to attack, whether it's to defend, whether it's to belittle themselves, get upset with another, go get a drink, go get, any of these kind of reactions. Do you find that that comes from maybe how they grew up? Like I was just saying, like that was how I reacted when I was most upset. I would pull myself away from everyone.
As long as that healed the trigger, I think that means it worked for you. But if you've been doing that pattern or trying to walk away or, you know, get a drink of water, whatever, but you still see this pattern, it means it's not necessarily working for you.
Mm,
So I think, like in coaching, one of the first things we do is, what are your self care
mm,
go tos? And what is it that makes you feel safe or calm or happy or whatever? We go through a lot of things that either way that kind of makes you feel good. And it takes practice. They get to choose what it is. but you have to know it. But it's like having a tool in your back pocket and knowing that and practicing. It might not go well in the first try, but actually, when you're triggered, it might remind you, oh, actually, I could have pulled out that tool. I could
Mm.
have done that. And then, it's just small steps, but that's also an awareness. And then the next time you can pull that tool and do it and see how you feel.
I love self care. I'm a huge self care advocate. Can you give some examples of how self care can show up for people?
I hear music, meditation. I hear eating fruits. People like to go to the gym or watch a movie, anything that they enjoy. It's very different. It could be allowing themselves a piece of chocolate or a cookie or whatever. Really anything people what people enjoy doing.
Right, right. So coming up with a list of what do I enjoy? What
Right,
helps bring me what you said was a sense of safety and nourishment for myself by myself.
right.
And I think like those two steps, I'm speaking to you out there listening to this. If you're feeling like you're getting triggered a lot, step one is awareness. Step two is acceptance without judgment. Step three is engaging in some kind of self care practice that ideally you've already thought of what that is. Because when
Right.
we get in that moment, we're triggered, we're like, I don't even know what I want to do. But you've already got like the list. Maybe you've written a list of like three or four things that feel really good to
Yeah.
you.
So maybe it'll help. One of the questionnaires I send to my clients before we get into that self-care is I ask them, what are all your favorite things to do? What are all your food, favorite restaurant, your favorite music, favorite shopping online or offline, for your body, for your heart, for your ears, for your eyes, your scent, smell. All those things are something that you can turn to.
Right. Yeah, that's really helpful. And I do a daily self care practice because I was so lost. I was 2017, I started, and I was just so lost. I didn't know who I was. And my self care practice helped to reconnect me to or connect me to the person that I had become. And, after having two kids and no personal space at all, and, losing myself, I helped myself to learn who I was in that moment as a mother of two, a business owner, and everything. So self care is really invaluable. And so let's say people have done those steps and they're saying,
Mm,
I still need help.
mhm.
I want to reach out to Reno because I need help to move through it. How would people work with you? How do you work with clients?
A lot of times it's word of mouth and referrals, but I do have a website.
Hmm.
It's rinomurata.com. My Instagram is rinomurata.coaching. Email, direct messaging, whatever it is, you can book a call and share with me what it is that you are wanting.
So you work one on one with people, and is it like a per session, or do you have a program that you help people with?
Yes, it is a 8-week
Mhm.
trigger-free relationship coaching program, one-on-one. Recently, I have been certified as a EQI practitioner, emotional intelligence.
Mm,
So we will use that assessment. It has shaved weeks off. It's something, emotions are something we think that is fuzzy and we can't see, but it is a level B assessment. It's valid scientifically and reliable. So it's governed under the Canadian Psychology Association or the American Psychology Association. And I have found that this has been a very powerful tool to move forward very quickly because it allows you to see what works for you. What were the emotions that carried you through this life, no matter how messy it looks? And in order for you to move to a direction that, you desire, there are skill sets emotional skill sets that you can develop. That's the thing about emotion is it's developable, that you can develop them. It's not a set in stone. And when you take that assessment, it's only a snapshot of that time. It could change.
Yeah, that would be really interesting to see the snapshot at the beginning of your work and at the end of your work, and then a year into the future to really get this idea of how we can become more emotionally intelligent with perseverance and resiliency and focus on ourselves, which is important. I think many people focus on so many other people and all of their responsibilities. So I would say, if you're hearing this and you feel like you are triggered left and right and every which way, please reach out to Reno and try these few tips to get yourself started, and reach out to Reno to get some really focused one-on-one attention. Thank you, Reno, so much for being on the podcast and sharing your knowledge.
Thank you, Carrie.
Thanks so much for listening to the Relationship Diversity Podcast. Want to learn more about relationship diversity? I've got a free guide I'd love to send you. Go to www.relationshipdiversitypodcast.com to get yours sent right to you. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe to the podcast. You being here and participating in the conversation about relationship diversity is what helps us create a space of inclusivity and acceptance together. The more comfortable and normal it is to acknowledge the vast and varied relating we all do, the faster we'll shift to a paradigm of conscious, intentional, and diverse relationships. New episodes are released every Thursday. Stay connected with me through my website, carriejaroslow.com, Instagram, or TikTok. Stay curious. Every relationship is as unique as you are.